Welcome, everybody. I think a few people are still connected to audio. It's lovely to see so many people here on a Friday, well, lunchtime where I am, but it depends on where you all are. Um, I am going to just give it 30 seconds while people join, and then we will start. Um, if you'd like to all say hello and do a quick introduction, perhaps where you are in the world in the chat, that's always really interesting to see where everybody is. So I am going to make a start, and then everybody that's not quite on time will have to wait. And once I've done the introductions, I will let them in. So thank you for all joining me today. I think it shows by the number of people that registered and are actually all pouring in now that, we're all acutely aware that AI is changing what's going on in our world, and, things are changing so rapidly. And there are lots of people who are very rightly saying things along the lines of, our data has to be good enough for AI, but nobody's really explaining what that means. So I was really thrilled that my good friend Rob Saundby agreed to come and run a masterclass for me, because I've known and worked with Rob on and off for years now. But Rob is always really good at being at the cutting edge of the technology and what's changing. And he's working on getting data AI ready at the moment. So it was absolutely fabulous that you agreed to come and do this, Rob. So welcome. I will hand over to you. We are going to have questions as we go. So type them in the chat and I will spot them and interrupt Rob. But generally, if you could keep on mute, it means that it keeps the general sound quality much better for everybody else on the call. But please put your any questions in chat and I will call them out and interrupt Rob. Anything else I've forgotten to say, Rob? I think that's it.
No, that's great. Thanks very
Excellent.
much.
So over to you, Rob.
Excellent, great. Can you see the screen okay?
Not yet. It hasn't come through. That looks like it's coming
That
through.
better? Great.
There it is. It's through now, Rob. We can see that fine.
Perfect. Let me just need the chat. So, oops. Let me just share that again.
That's all right.
Okay, can you see that?
No, it's not
No?
come back again yet, Rob.
No. Is that there?
Yep. You're not in slideshow.
Right, I'll go into
We can
present
see.
mode.
There you go. That's all going working well now, Rob.
Okay, let me just minimize this. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for taking some time out to join this masterclass. Um, Yeah, as I said, I've been, as Nicola mentioned, I've been working in the data space now for well over a decade, and really, data there are quite often buzzwords that come in every 2 or 3 years. We hear of new buzzwords and new trends and new things that people are talking about. And one that I really started hearing about recently was, AI ready data. And so it kind of um, piqued my curiosity a little bit to find out a bit more what that meant, and what exactly does it mean to be enterprise AI ready data. The reason that I wanted to look into enterprise ready data is that enterprises being large, complex organizations, and a lot of them are beginning to use AI. Rather than just saying what's AI ready data, because AI is covers a very broad spectrum. This is really looking at AI being used by large complex organizations or enterprises. Um, just to kick off, I've got about 5 or 6 slides, so not too many. just a couple of quotes first of all to kind of position, what the landscape is like at the moment. So these are quotes from 2024, but I think they're pretty relevant today. So according to McKinsey, 70% of organizations have implemented AI, in at least one business function in companies. So it's something that is growing, and it's accelerating, but only 11%, have implemented AI at scale. So this word at scale is really important because what it means is that a lot of the AI that companies have started implementing has been what I'd call edge cases, specific sort of small cases. Whereas where we're really going to in the next few years is, according to what we're reading in the press, is that AI is going to grow and is going to dominate, and obviously we hear all this, the media news stories about how AI will completely change business operations. So the quote at the bottom is from Gartner, and really what that's saying is that companies need to treat AI ready data as being slightly different from how we've looked at enterprise data management over the past sort of 5, 10 years. So there's a bit of a shift in our thinking. And this is really the question, that got my curiosity. And hopefully that I'll spend the next few minutes talking through firstly what I found out, and really what I think we can, how organizations can go about being more AI ready. So, so first of all, taking a step back, what do we mean by enterprise AI? AI covers a very, very broad spectrum. So what I started to think about was, well, how have organizations used AI up till now? And it's quite often been, in the past, it started fairly small scale. Image recognition was one of the first use cases, recommendations engines, website personalization, chatbots. This is what we were seeing a few years ago, and I think now we've now evolved to a stage. Chat GPT has been a huge thing in the last in the last year or so. Large language models, Gen AI. So companies are starting to ramp up their use, and a lot of organizations that I've worked in have now got their own kind of enterprise chat. Um, and this is sort of getting I think people are finding that there are different aspects, of business operations that are starting to use AI. But I think where we are now moving into is this kind of era of enterprise connected AI, and this is a kind of I suppose a much bigger scale. And when we use the word scale, this is going from being small, maybe a few applications, a few data domains, into something that is really, really transformative, um, and really impacts core business operations. So the vertical line here is kind of showing competitive advantage. So as the complexity of implementing AI increases, but so the competitive advantage can be massive. And with things like knowledge graphs and AI agents, so this is where potentially in some workflow processes in companies there might be, at some point, AI communicating and making information available to people. This will be changing the way people work. It'll be changing behaviors, and having a significant transformative impact. So this is my view, and I think right now we're kind of, where this star is. We're sort of moving into the realm of being enterprise connected AI. You may have heard from a lot of sources, and especially in the data management space, that data is really the fuel for AI. And I've heard a couple of, I guess, strap lines on this, by the data community. One is, you can't have AI, artificial intelligence, without IA. That's information architecture. And what the information architects would argue that you really need to get your data right, get your information management right in order to exploit AI. I was also talking to a colleague who worked in the more the technical architecture space, and he had heard of another strapline, which was you can't have AI without API. APIs being the connectors between systems in large organizations. And his view was that in order to achieve this kind of connected AI world, the systems that contain important business critical information need to be able to communicate and move data from one application to another. So I think a lot of those conversations, what they were really trying to say, the message I was getting was that to get to a stage where organizations can really gain significant competitive advantage, there needs to be some work to underneath, if you like, under the bonnet, to get the data right. So that leads to the question, what do we mean by enterprise AI ready data? Um, and I've got a couple of slides just on this question. Um, I guess the most obvious thing, is that AI is machines, and machines are different to humans. So the way that we want to prepare data to be used by machines is probably subtly different from the way that we want us to read it. So we would expect, good data to be high quality, to be something that humans can understand. But machines are slightly different. They behave and work in slightly different ways, and therefore the data probably needs to be slightly different. Um, the next 2 points are kind of about the types of data. So most companies, they have a mixture of structured, which is organized data, and unstructured data. Um, and you could think of the analogy that structured data is the books in a library, and the unstructured data is just, loads of sheets of paper scattered and thrown about the floor. Both can be valuable. Most organizations from a corporate perspective, their core business, they do use structured data, and this is often called master data or reference data. And this is the data that really is used for core business processes. And increasingly, unstructured data is becoming important, partly because of the ability for AI to make sense of it in a way that humans can't. But I'm going to focus quite a lot of I guess, my insights more on structured data. And the reason for that is that enterprises, large complex organizations, their core business is largely driven by structured data. So I'm thinking here customer data, supplier data, product data is really the absolutely business critical, data that drives the business, and makes money. Not that unstructured data isn't really important, but I'm just going to focus the next few kind of slides more on the structured data side. Um, so a couple of other kind of points around what do we mean by enterprise ready data. So machines, unlike humans, we need to sleep. Machines can just work through day and night. And therefore, when it comes to data quality, in the past, we might have run data quality checks that run every week or every month or quarter, and that was probably fine for giving some insight into business operations. With machines running, all the time, perhaps there's a different way of looking at data quality. Maybe the way these data pipeline works is that we need to be monitoring them on a continual basis. This is often called data observability. So with the ability to deal with higher volume data at a much faster cadence, maybe there is a need, to do data quality checks a lot more frequently. Also, when it comes to data quality, humans, we would think of, good data quality is what we need. That's our goal. That's what we're aiming for. But for AI, in some cases, to certainly to train the AI, bad data maybe as relevant as good data. This might sound slightly counterintuitive, but to train models, it's important to tell a machine what is bad as much as what is good. So data quality, as well as it being, a small amount of high quality data that humans might use, it may be that, machines actually need a much broader range of representative data, including synthetic manufactured data. And then, of course, we don't want a machine to do something and to make decisions and be doing things without us knowing exactly how it came to that conclusion. So, explainable, traceable data, both for regulatory compliance, which companies, have to conform to, and also, internal audit and processes, is really important. So, whereas AI systems, we don't want them to be black boxes where you just push in a load of data and get an answer without knowing how it came to that answer. Um, we kind of want to avoid that situation. This could be compounded where you've got AI agents. So in this, let's go a few years down the line, because if AI is actually going through a business process and coming to a decision or making a conclusion about the data, and then moving it to another AI agent, this could actually amplify that effect. So having having explainable systems, where we can trace data is almost more important if a machine is doing it on a human's behalf. It's important for humans, but it's really important for machines because we want to be able to explain how they came to certain conclusions. So these two slides really pose a question, what do we mean by it? Of course, the next the follow-on to that is, well, what do we need to do? If enterprise AI ready data is about these things, then what should companies be doing to prepare themselves for this new world? And I've got a couple of slides which just give what my view is, having spoken to a number of people and kind of researched this space, which hopefully you'll find insightful. So, ways to make your company data AI ready. So, I mentioned earlier that the focus of this is structured data. Structured data being the core type of data that businesses use to function. And if we're asking machines to look at this data, then it is almost stands to reason that machines need to be very clear about what the data is. Um, and whereas having identifiers, so let's say customers, you might have a customer ID, and that's okay. But what happens if a customer ID is in one system and you get a customer in another? Let's say they're in the CRM system and you get a customer in a customer support system, and they can't match up the ID, so you get the same person. This is going beyond what we might have called master data management, having IDs, and it's actually to say, well, for machines, they really need something even more um, even more sticky than a globally unique identifier. They need something that is persistent, and persistent identifiers is uh, you can think of this as being a website URL. When you get the website name, you can type that in. Doesn't matter which country you're in or whether you're using your phone or a laptop. It'll always resolve that identifier to go to the same web page. So in the same way, if we run AI models and then 6 months later run another one, um, we would actually want to know that this explainability, this traceability is going to be done in a way that persists. Doesn't matter, if the systems change, if the processes change. So one new way of looking at data and identifying data very precisely is to use persistent identifiers. Um, Another really important part is semantic meaning. So what I mean by that is, and this is a current challenge of enterprise data management. One system might call a customer, another might call it a client, another might call it something else, but the data might mean the same. So this is almost going beyond just having that business glossary, and it's actually saying, well, we probably need things like classifiers and ways of annotating and tagging things over and beyond what we used before. This is really closely related to the third point, which is around data standards, and particularly around managed lists and controlled vocabularies, because um, it's one thing for humans to be able to look at a list of um, a couple of lists of things and intuitively say, well, they look pretty similar. But for a machine to do that, you need to describe things in a more precise way. So there is uh, almost like a need um, for reference data management to go probably beyond what exists right now in a lot of large organizations. And controlled vocabularies is one way of doing that. Essentially, controlled lists of things. So this is talking a little bit, I guess, about the architecture, the data architecture, some of the ways that companies can help make data AI ready. Um, but there's also a couple of other kind of really important points here. One is, the relationships between data. So some of you might be working in organizations, you might have heard of knowledge graphs. This is a slightly different way of capturing the relationships between data, but they're coming increasingly important as a sort of almost as a middle point between operational systems and AI consumable data, which would typically be in the form of data products in large organizations. So knowledge graphs you could think of as being just a way of stitching all the data together in a way that makes sense. But there are specific technologies now that are being increasingly used in enterprises to be able to stitch data together. And obviously these, from a enterprise data management perspective, would be very tightly aligned to enterprise data catalogs, to enterprise data models, and enterprise data controlled vocabularies. So you could almost think of a knowledge graph as being a way of stitching all the data together so that machines can consume it. And a big use case
Okay.
for AI is to be able to make is to gain insight and make inferences. And the better these knowledge graphs can be, the better the AI can help. Um, and then finally, just reiterating that point about being explainable, and whether this is that there are many different ways that this can be done using persistent identifiers, but also versioning, um, perhaps to a degree that isn't in place in existing organizations. So I've covered quite a few points there, and thanks for your time and listening. Just to sort of summarize a few takeaways, AI is changing business as we know it, but to scale, organizations need to ensure their data is ready for their AI use cases. And this is a key thing, knowing how you want to use AI is one step towards knowing how you need to prepare your data. There are some set pieces, as I mentioned, which can help with this. Things like persistent identifiers, so we always know what data is throughout its whole life cycle. Semantics, knowing what things mean, but going beyond our current view of a business glossary, and having really controlled lists so there's not a need to map lists of things between different systems, so that machines can really understand that a list in one area is the same as a list in another. And the need for better transparency and explainability. That there's a big surge in the adoption and the use of AI, but we mustn't forget the fact that if critical decisions are being made that will impact our lives, there does need to be accountability for how these AI solutions are built, and we do need the ability to be able to understand how these machines, how AI is using our data, and to be able to explain it. Yeah, thanks very much for listening. That was it. And I hope that that was useful and has sort of helped, help people understand some of the challenges around getting AI ready data and, and approaches that we can take um, to really make a better future with delivering value from AI. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Thanks, Rob. I was making some notes. I'm sure other people were as well. So nobody's put any questions in the chat yet, but please feel free. We thought we were going to be here to have questions, didn't we? So, but I thought I was really interested in that, and then I think it's the first time I've heard anybody mention it was the talking about, perhaps improve reference data management. I think that was really interesting. And I thought, oh yeah, you're so right when you said that. But I think a lot of people don't want to do reference data management because it's harder than even normal master data management. And then you've got to have governance around it and it gets hard. So how do you convince people that the reference data, are you using examples of perhaps poor reference data to get people on board?
Yeah, I mean, I think, reference data management, it's been around for a long time, and it is one of the more drier areas of data management. Simply having lists that don't, that are different in different applications. So a list of types of product, or a list of types of um, resources, or even things like people's titles. And I think everyone knows that in enterprises, these things are always, there's a lack of consistency and a lack of standardization. And it is a bit of a headache sometimes to get them to line up. I think people get around that in human systems by just knowing, spotting differences easily. Um, and so to some extent we can get around that. I think with AI, there's going to be a sort of an increased need to get those right, because if they're not right, then AI won't be able to join data up. It won't be able to tell to map things. I guess there's an argument that AI itself could try to align these reference data sets, and that's certainly one thing that some product vendors I've seen are using, so that they can try to recognize that there's a problem with lists not being the same and to try to make some sensible way of connecting them. But I think this will be a challenge that will, potentially we'll find is compounded if companies don't start to look into it. Um, but it is getting easier to manage reference data. There are tools out there that make it a lot easier now than, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years ago. Yeah.
Excellent. That's really good to know. I like the idea of tools helping you do because that crosswalk management of reference data lists is a nightmare if you do it manually. But that's a whole other conversation. We've got people have had time to get typing now, and we've got some questions. So Ben has asked, actually a really key question, and Dom has kind of summed it up as well. How do you ensure that top level management actually understand and act on this? Because I think, by definition, I would guess that all of us on this call are data geeks. We've always got the importance of data, and we find it hard enough to convince them to do data governance, let alone now kind of go over and above for AI. So how are you going around convincing them?
No, very good question, and potentially difficult to do because, senior management might just that they might have been sold this idea that AI can do everything. The uncomfortable truth is that it is a question of having good data foundations to get the most value out of AI. Um, as with a lot of things data wise, it's the regulator, the threat of fines, non-compliance, which is often a big stick and actually makes companies, invest and do the right thing. So AI governance. I mean, that you've got the EU AI Act, and this differs across the world in different jurisdictions. But there probably will be increasing compliance demands, and that's probably realistically going to be, one way that changes the behaviors of companies, and particularly when, the exec feels the need to, that they need to invest in things because of the threat of regulatory fines. The other one, of course, is, whenever there's a big problem, reputational damage, then people act. So we see this a lot with with the banks when there are either cybersecurity scares or data leaks or breaches. Things like that then cause people to change. What we really want to try and avoid is to have some big catastrophe with AI that makes us act. I think it's far better if we can preempt any of this and try to do the right thing before that. Certainly in the case of explainability. But it is an overhead, and it's always going to be challenging to get senior leaders to understand that.
So, can I ask a follow-up question for that? This is the joy of hosting this, isn't it? I get to ask my questions. So I thought that was really interesting, and you were making me think that when I'm helping my clients do data governance, I tell them not to use other people's examples of what's gone wrong when they haven't had data governance, because everybody go, yeah, well, we're not like that. We're in a different sector, or we use a different system, and they're not listening to you about why your company should do data governance. But I wondered when you were talking whether perhaps this is an example, because it's so new and it's changing so quickly. Where do you think that perhaps you think there have been some AI horror stories, haven't there? Whereas AI's done the wrong thing, that should we perhaps be highlighting them to our senior managers, because they don't want to be the one that is the next AI horror story splashed all over social media and things.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, there have been some, well-documented cases. I think even in the early days with image recognition, there was some system that pulled out the names of US congressmen as a potential felon, from matching,
Excellent.
images. And that there are several cases of bias, that've been found in AI models. I think. I think it's just important, probably is important to raise as these occur in society. I think it's important that people know and understand them and what the risks are. Mainly to avoid them happening. That there are several groups now that are sprouting up all over in the both Europe and the US around ethics and around how we should be using AI as a society. It's something that we need to really think about, because and this goes from everything from self-driving cars, all those moral ethical questions about if there's an accident, who's accountable. Yeah, I think we just need to surface these so people are aware of them. And as with anything, in business, there's generally some kind of risk framework that we need to operate in. We want to do things the right way. We want to avoid risk. And as a new technology, the early days, yeah, people are trying out different things, and I think there just need to be some guardrails, some guidelines, and some common agreement on what is best practice, so that we avoid anything that could, upset people, or get companies, into the situation where they have to pay fines to a regulator.
Excellent. No, that's really useful, Rob. So we've got a couple more questions. So Lynn has said, thank you. This is very useful, which I totally agree, Lynn. Does it mean that as it currently stands, it's rare for data to be AI ready? So she's got, the systems may have a unique identifier that they can share between them, but it's actually hard to cross-report between them.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what exactly is AI ready? Well, you could argue that, and I spoke earlier on about the difference between structured and unstructured data. Unstructured data has always been really, really difficult to figure out, and now AI is helping us understand, using optical character recognition to harvest, huge piles of books, in the basement, and then make sense of the content. So the legal industries in particular has been, a sort of in the forefront of this. Um, so I think to some extent, AI can look at any kind of data sets, but I think there are particular ways that companies can prepare their data to be able to use, and I'm thinking here particularly things like AI agents, they're almost the new kid on the block that a lot of people are talking about now that are being developed. And what this really means is that existing operational processes will be, rather than being run by, having humans in the loop, they'll be able to have some kind of automation in the loop and perhaps decision making in company workflows. So to do that for structured data, you do need to be very precise about what the data is, and so things like persistent identifiers and controlled vocabularies actually become essential to be able to have the right handoffs from one AI agent to another. And we need to be able to explain, why one did a certain thing. So, yes and no to the question is: do we actually need to prepare any of our data for AI? One way of answering it would be no, just use what we've got. But the other one would be, well, if you want to use automation for certain things, in particular workflow type activities using AI agents, you probably do need to make sure that they're doing the right thing and that there's a lot of oversight on that. And that's when you really need to be prepared to have your data in the best possible state, so that you can know that these agents are working, in a way that you have a high degree of confidence and trust into the fact that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. That's really helpful. So we've got one more from Erin, and then it looks like Darby's shared some useful stuff at the bottom there. But let me not forget Erin's question. So she's put that we're in the early stages of implementing data governance. Since we're starting fresh, what can we do as we build our processes and standards so that we're supporting readiness for AI? That sounds like a excellent question, Erin, and a really good thing to be thinking about early on in data governance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of, AI, it's really just an additional thing on top of what we mean by enterprise, data governance, data quality and standards and best practice. I think to be looking ahead at potentially how AI can be used in your organization is great, when you're starting a data governance journey. Interestingly, some of the organizations I've worked in, they've had an enterprise data governance team, and also an enterprise AI governance team. And and in some cases they've been quite separate, with the AI governance being looking at a broader spectrum, not just data, but kind of more broadly about the use of AI. I think that there is a point where they do come together. So I'd probably encourage anyone who's working in data governance, perhaps to reach out to their colleagues, working in AI governance, and see what the overlaps are. That's probably a sensible way that a lot of people starting out in data governance can do as a first step. But great to be thinking about AI. Always be good to be looking at what's coming up down the road in the future.
Yeah, I even go a step further, Rob, and I actually think there's probably a case for data governance and AI governance to be done by the same team. So, but I think it's a bare minimum, exactly what you said, you need to be working together. I wrote an article on it for a software vendor last year, so I'll see if I can find it and share that in the chat in case that's useful for you. So Dami has sent a really long this is really good. So Dami's found that compelling data narratives effectively gain management buy-in, which I think is very true. For instance, I show program managers how quality data in Look at AI allows both executives and staffs to query information using natural language. And this helped our managers understand the importance of our metadata standards and table naming conventions. Similar presentations to executives can help highlight the value of maintaining high quality data. I think that sounds brilliant. I'm also working to connect data governance initiatives directly to revenue generation or improvement, which is always a good idea. I have some preliminary ideas, but would appreciate hearing how you've successfully made this connection in your experience. There you go. Over to you, Rob.
Yeah, so
I
on
could
the
probably help as well.
the first point, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, the main topic today has been preparing data for AI, but we mustn't forget that AI is a really good tool for actually getting our house in order, when it comes to spotting data quality issues and supporting with that. So yeah, there are some there are definitely some ways that AI can assist with that. Looking at mining data and databases, being able to query using natural language. So absolutely, there's definitely a big case for AI helping solve some of our existing um, uh, data management challenges, particularly around data quality. Um, the second question was around linking to business value. Was that the uh,
Yeah, yeah, revenue generation or improvement.
yeah, I mean, of course, this is the goal of, companies is to, is to make money, to increase revenue at reduced risk. So being able to tie any kind of enabling function like IT or data management or AI to achieve those company objectives is really, really crucial. The closer the line of sight can be um, between this enabling work and and the business goals, the better, because it means that the execs who've got an eye on the bottom line, the sales figures, they can actually see how these various initiatives are helping them. And quite often, you know, data, technology, that they're slightly under the bonnet. You're not the person driving the car, but this is all the stuff that goes on to make the machine move forward. So I think the just from my own experience, the narrower that path is, and the easier it is to be able to trace, business value to efforts like data governance, the better. It is quite challenging sometimes, but absolutely, I would 100% agree with that. With that objective. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add that's why if some of you have read my stuff or heard me speak before, I'm often known to say my favorite process is the data quality issue resolution process. I think I'm a sad person to even have a favorite process, but it is such a valuable one to do because whether we are trying to focus our efforts on making our data ready for AI or just something else, we can't do it all at once. And we're busily putting in place perhaps the foundations so we can do AI. But in the meantime, other people are having issues with data. And that's why I like to have this central process where people report issues to me. I can do the root cause analysis and get the data owners, the data stewards working with me to get them fixed. Because then I'm solving real problems. And they sometimes are income generation, they're sometimes efficiencies, cost reduction. But they give you things to shout about whilst you're doing all the hard work to get the standards, to get the data cleansed and fixed. So that can be really, really valuable as well. So that's good. So now I'm going to apologize for mispronouncing your name. Is it Ashani? Um, says that there are cases is where a company is eager to build Gen AI agents to support data operations and feel like data governance is an obstacle they need to get through. So, what are some metrics we can use to build the case that data governance actually supports AI development?
Yeah, that's this is a bit of a classic one because a new tool comes in, and the some of the tool vendors are very good at selling what can be done,
Yeah.
and it's a kind of a technology, a tool to to get in, and you don't need to do some of the hard work. I think the first thing is that, yeah, it's true that that there is some a lot of the new tools coming in, particularly sort of AI type tools can help improve productivity in a really positive way. I think and of course data governance in some organizations is seen as being that bit of administrative overhead, the policy and the processes. And why not just sidetrack them and get in there and deliver the output? So um, the I guess one way that I've found of explaining the need for data governance, some of it's around accountability, so that you can put in a tool, you can press a button, and it can do its stuff and kind of churn some output out. But who's actually accountable for the way it was set up, from the rules, the way it uses data, and having someone on the hook. Um, very quickly they'll probably, look to data governance. Okay, are we in line with the company policies? Are we in line with our, what our regulators are asking, and compliance and audit and all the things that need to be in place? And I think if it could be sold as just a thin layer of assurance on top of, bolting on this tool to improve that process, but a very necessary, but but perhaps a thin layer of assurance. I think that's one way of explaining it. Um, and it is quite difficult sometimes to explain to people why data governance takes so long, and and so they're looking at sidestepping it. But I think to focus on the value that it adds and trying to minimize as much as possible, the overheads are a couple of things, and there are things that can be done to try to streamline the overheads. But of course, data governance, there are factors at play. There's culture, there's politics, and some of these things are sort of just part of the bigger picture, and they can inhibit things. Not being able to get an owner, not being able to get anyone, to be accountable to own data, not get anyone to be able to be the person on the hook. These aren't sort of technical things. These are more kind of cultural and organizational and even political type things that need to be overcome. But I would say thin layer of data governance, but selling the benefit and the value in terms of assurance. Yeah, are ways I'd probably go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think we've got yeah, thank you for that. I think we've got you were mentioning regulation there, which is really handy because Sidipa asked a question saying, can you share some insights on your take on the regulatory and ethical aspects of AI and how data governance helps?
Yeah, I mean, there are almost two things, regulatory and ethical. So regulations, and different industries have different regulations, and then they're generally there to protect, to protect the consumers. So in banking, we have regulation to protect consumers, protect their money. In the pharmaceutical industry, we have regulations to protect, patients. Um, so they're there for a reason. Regulations, of course, can differ between different jurisdictions, and particularly, US, Europe, and Asia. They quite often have different views on what is required for regulatory purposes. But it's quite clear because it's what the regulator demands. In terms of ethical, yeah, this is definitely a very interesting area. And I think as AI gets used more and more, there will be more and more discussions in society about what it means. Some of the aspects of ethics and bias have sort of come up, but I think we're still only at the early stages of having organizations really use AI in a way that um, can affect different groups of people. Um, Most organizations have stood up some AI governance, and their role is to ensure that AI is used the right way. But with the recent EU AI Act, what was quite clear is that there are some divisions in what people think is important when it comes to AI governance. The US and UK are kind of on the one side, and you could argue that some of the big players in this space, the big uh, 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 IT and sort of tech companies in Silicon Valley have got one view on this and want to proceed at a fast pace and see benefits to society, but don't want to, they don't want to be restrained. Whereas others are a little bit more, conservative, and perhaps see that the best path forward is to move a little bit, a little bit slower, to have some more guardrails to make sure things are done the right way. So yeah, I'm sure very interesting area. A lot of discussion about this at the moment online, and I don't have a particular answer other than to say that fundamentally, if companies have data and using AI in a way that's explainable, and we have these things, these kind of architectural kind of patterns in place in terms of the data architecture, then it should be easier for people to explain why AI has done what it's done, um, rather than it being a black box that just spits out an answer that might cause a problem down the line. But yeah, very interesting area.
Yeah, and I think just the bit I would say, Sudeepa, is that one of the reasons, or one of the conclusions I came to when I was writing that paper I shared the link for, was I was talking to everybody in my network who whether was doing AI governance, whether they were in data governance or not, was that I think data governance, I mean, it does it anyway without AI. It stops everybody working in silos and we make it easier for the business to do things. And I think you were talking about enabling things, weren't you, Rob? And we definitely don't want to be obstacles. Um, and I think but putting the two together makes it just so much easier, because if you have a good idea of a use case for AI in your organization, and now I've got to think, has it got personal data? Because I'm going to have to go to the protection or privacy team, and then I'll have to go to the AI governance team, and then I'll have to go to the data governance team. And you can imagine why we just look like another blocker, and we shouldn't be. And I think if we can streamline the processes, fit them all together, and in an ideal world, definitely have AI governance and data governance on the same team, it makes it easier for the users, and we can streamline it and not ask everybody the same questions or similar questions from a different angle. Just my personal view. So I think have we got to the end of the questions? I think that's it, unless anybody's got any last questions. Thank you so much, Rob. It's always great talking to you. If anybody wants to get in contact with you and ask you more questions afterwards, is LinkedIn the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can be found on LinkedIn. Yeah, and happy to have any further conversations about this if anyone wants anything that they want to explore further or discuss further. Yeah.
Excellent. I will just share Rob's link. LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect to him. So thank you very much, everybody. And hopefully I will see you at another masterclass soon at some point. Thank you so much, Rob.
Okay, thank you.
Bye bye.